Saving money before you hit $10,000 feels pointless, like throwing pennies into a canyon. But crossing the $10,000 threshold transforms your financial mindset from survival to opportunity, giving you real control over your money and your life. Early-stage saving is one of the most psychologically frustrating experiences anyone can go through. When a person begins putting money aside, the immediate feeling is often pride and accomplishment. But that sensation quickly fades when life inevitably intervenes. Emergencies, unexpected bills, and daily expenses have a way of eroding small savings almost as fast as they are built. For someone who has $500 or $1,000 saved, a single car repair, a broken appliance, or a medical bill can wipe out weeks or months of careful financial planning. This creates a strong psychological pattern of frustration, where the individual begins to feel that their efforts are futile. The emotional weight of seeing money disappear makes the process of saving feel like an endless uphill battle rather than a pathway to security or freedom. The brain processes these setbacks not as isolated events but as an overall judgment on the individual's ability to manage money, which can lead to discouragement and even abandonment of savings goals. The experience of saving small amounts without achieving meaningful stability reinforces a sense of scarcity and vulnerability. People begin to associate saving with anxiety rather than progress because the money they accumulate does not feel sufficient to protect them from real-world risks. Every financial emergency becomes a test of survival, highlighting how fragile their situation is and how little control they have over it. This ongoing tension creates a cycle where motivation diminishes over time. A person saves diligently for months, only to watch their balance shrink back down due to circumstances beyond their control. This repeated experience conditions the mind to expect setbacks, fostering a sense of futility and eroding confidence in one's financial skills. Additionally, the comparison with peers exacerbates the frustration, while the individual sacrifices immediate pleasures and lives frugally to save. Friends or colleagues with little or no savings may continue spending freely, enjoying experiences, vacations, or consumer items. Seeing others appear happier despite financial recklessness intensifies the perception that saving is unrewarding. The psychological impact of this comparison cannot be underestimated, as humans naturally evaluate their progress and self-worth against those around them. Furthermore, small savings do not provide tangible leverage or opportunity. With amounts like $800 or $1,000, a person cannot take meaningful risks, make significant investments, or create transformative changes in their life. The money is insufficient to buy freedom from financial stress or to pursue opportunities, leaving the saver in a defensive posture. The saved amount functions purely as a buffer for emergencies, not as a tool for growth. This defensive mindset is rooted in fear and scarcity, which dominates the psychological landscape of early-stage saving. Every dollar is viewed through the lens of, what if something goes wrong? Rather than, how can I use this to improve my life? The focus on protection over opportunity creates mental fatigue, as individuals are constantly monitoring, rationing, and worrying about their limited resources. Another aspect of early-stage saving is the perceived lack of progress. While a person may have been diligently saving for 6 months, the total accumulated sum can feel insignificant relative to their financial goals or life circumstances. The small balance fails to create a sense of security or empowerment, and the brain registers it as insufficient. This perceived inadequacy diminishes motivation, because the effort does not yield meaningful reward, and it can lead to questioning the purpose of saving at all. In sum, early-stage saving is a psychologically grueling process. The money accumulated is often too small to provide real security. Life's expenses constantly erode progress, and comparisons with peers amplify feelings of inadequacy. This creates a cycle of frustration, discouragement, and emotional strain. Despite disciplined effort, the saver experiences minimal satisfaction, and the process feels like constant defensive maneuvering against an unpredictable world rather than a step toward wealth or freedom. The psychological weight of operating in this vulnerable zone explains why so many people abandon savings before reaching meaningful thresholds, and why early-stage saving is universally experienced as challenging and emotionally taxing. The $10,000 threshold represents a profound psychological and financial turning point, one that fundamentally changes how a person interacts with money. Before reaching this amount, every dollar saved is primarily defensive, functioning as a buffer against emergencies, unexpected expenses, and the inevitable disruptions of life. The mindset of someone below this threshold is dominated by scarcity and fear, a constant calculation of risk and survival rather than opportunity or growth. They measure every decision through the lens of, can I survive this month if something goes wrong? Rather than, how can I make my money work for me? This defensive posture is exhausting, mentally taxing, and often discouraging. Saving feels like a constant struggle against the world rather than a step toward empowerment. The individual experiences frequent setbacks that reinforce the sense that their efforts are futile. A small emergency can erase months of careful saving, and the emotional toll is magnified because the lost money represents a large portion of the total accumulated sum. In this zone, the brain is hyper-aware of vulnerability and reacts to risk with heightened stress, which often leads to impulsive or short-term thinking. Every choice is governed by fear, and the potential for wealth building remains abstract and distant. When a person crosses the $10,000 threshold, this entire dynamic shifts dramatically. Suddenly, money stops being purely defensive and begins to operate as a tool for opportunity. The psychological impact of having $10,000 is disproportionate to the raw numerical value. It is the first amount of savings substantial enough to absorb most emergencies without threatening stability, allowing the individual to think strategically rather than reactively. With this level of security, the mind transitions from scarcity to abundance. The fear that dominated decisions below $10,000 is replaced by a sense of control, competence, and confidence. The individual begins to perceive money not just as a shield, but as a lever for creating opportunity. This transition enables a person to consider investment, entrepreneurship, education, or calculated risks that were previously unimaginable. For the first time, financial decisions are motivated by growth, not mere survival. This psychological change also influences behavior in profound ways. Once a person reaches $10,000, they are more likely to make consistent, rational decisions because the stress that clouds judgment has diminished. They are no longer reactive but proactive, able to evaluate opportunities and risks without being overwhelmed by the threat of catastrophe. The momentum created by this newfound confidence accelerates further wealth building. Saving, investing, and planning become natural extensions of identity rather than grueling exercises in delayed gratification. The $10,000 mark also marks a shift in perspective regarding the value of money. Below this threshold, every expense is weighed with anxiety, and the act of saving can feel like an endless series of sacrifices with little reward. Above it, the individual can afford to think about long-term goals, plan for meaningful life changes, and leverage their resources in ways that produce compounding benefits. The transition transforms money from a source of stress into a source of freedom and agency. Another crucial aspect of this threshold is the identity shift it triggers. Before $10,000, the saver sees themselves as someone trying to manage money, someone vulnerable, cautious, and reactive. After crossing it, they begin to see themselves as someone capable, competent, and in control of their financial destiny. This new identity reinforces disciplined habits and empowers the individual to make decisions aligned with long-term wealth accumulation. Crossing the $10,000 barrier also has a disproportionate effect on resilience. Financial setbacks, which once felt catastrophic, now register as minor annoyances because the individual possesses a buffer large enough to absorb shocks. Emergencies no longer threaten their psychological stability, which allows for more measured responses, strategic planning, and creative problem solving. The first $10,000 is not just a number. It represents a transition from financial defensiveness to offense, from scarcity to abundance, and from reactive survival to proactive growth. It is the point at which money begins to work for the individual rather than the individual being enslaved to the whims of circumstance. Achieving this milestone creates a virtuous cycle of confidence, better decision-making, and accelerated financial progress that transforms the trajectory of one's financial life in profound and lasting ways. Early-stage saving is psychologically brutal because it creates an illusion of progress while offering almost no tangible security. When someone is saving small amounts, such as a few hundred or a couple $1,000s, they often feel disciplined and responsible. But the reality is that they remain highly vulnerable. Every emergency, from a broken appliance to unexpected medical bills, can wipe out months of effort in a single moment. The emotional cost of this loss is far greater than the dollar amount because, in relative terms, it represents a significant portion of the individual's entire financial cushion. The sense of accomplishment that comes from accumulating small sums is constantly undermined by life's unpredictability, which can make saving feel futile. Unlike later stages, where money begins to act as a tool for growth, early savings function almost exclusively as a protective barrier against catastrophe. This defensive posture requires constant vigilance and decision-making driven by fear. People in this phase are always calculating, worrying, and strategizing about every possible scenario in which their small savings could be depleted. Because their resources are limited, every financial choice is emotionally charged, and the stress associated with even minor expenses can be overwhelming. This is what creates the financial purgatory that many savers experience. Money is not yet empowering, and it is not yet sufficient to provide freedom. It exists merely as a temporary shield that can easily be pierced. Psychologically, this creates a feedback loop of frustration and discouragement. The individual may save diligently for months, only to have an unforeseen event reduce their balance dramatically. The brain interprets this as failure, not as a normal fluctuation in the early stages of financial discipline. This contributes to the widespread phenomenon of people giving up before reaching a meaningful milestone. Small savings do not provide enough payoff to reinforce the behavior in a meaningful way. The human brain is wired to seek immediate feedback and reward, and early-stage saving often provides neither. This creates tension between long-term goals and short-term satisfaction. People may experience resentment or regret for foregoing spending in the present when the savings do not yet provide tangible security or opportunity. The repeated cycle of saving and losing money amplifies this effect, making the process emotionally exhausting. A critical aspect of early-stage saving is that progress feels invisible. Incremental growth is overshadowed by the reality of potential setbacks, making the effort feel disproportionate to the outcome. In this stage, the act of saving is less about wealth building and more about buying temporary stability. Every dollar saved is spent on reducing vulnerability rather than creating new opportunities. This defensive mindset is exhausting because it is reactive rather than proactive. In contrast to later financial stages, where money becomes a tool for growth and empowerment, early-stage savings force individuals to focus almost entirely on protection, limiting their ability to think strategically about investment, education, or income expansion. The emotional burden of this phase also contributes to irrational behavior. People may feel tempted to abandon their savings or rationalize small expenditures that undermine long-term goals, not due to laziness or lack of willpower, but because the psychological return on saving is minimal. Small savings do not trigger the sense of security and control that higher balances provide. Every emergency feels disproportionately catastrophic, and the brain constantly evaluates whether the effort to save is worth the limited protection it affords. This psychological dynamic explains why aggressive saving strategies are often more effective than slow, incremental approaches. The quicker someone moves through this vulnerable stage, the sooner they reach the point where their savings begin to act as a tool for financial freedom rather than just a shield against catastrophe. The first few $1,000s are not just difficult to save, they are psychologically punishing. They create a tension between effort and reward, between discipline and immediate gratification. Yet, enduring this stage is essential, because once the psychological barrier of small savings is overcome, a profound shift occurs. The individual begins to experience real control over money, resilience in the face of emergencies, and the ability to make strategic decisions that were previously impossible. Early-stage saving is therefore less about the monetary amount and more about building the psychological foundation for financial competence and confidence that will allow wealth to grow sustainably in the future. The psychological transformation that occurs when someone crosses the $10,000 savings threshold is profound, and it fundamentally changes how they relate to money. Below this level, every dollar saved is defensive. It is money kept out of harm's way, money preserved to survive unforeseen emergencies, and money that is constantly threatened by the unpredictable events of daily life. The mind remains fixated on scarcity, and every financial decision is weighed against the possibility of disaster. Small setbacks feel catastrophic because they represent a large portion of the individual's total savings. Emotional responses are amplified, and frustration accumulates as progress feels fleeting and inconsequential. The act of saving in this stage is mentally exhausting, and many individuals become discouraged before ever reaching the point where money feels like a tool rather than a burden. Crossing $10,000, however, marks a turning point. This is the threshold where defensive saving begins to transition into offensive financial behavior. Suddenly, money is no longer merely a shield. It becomes a resource that can be used to pursue opportunities, make calculated risks, and invest in personal growth. This shift changes the way people think, plan, and act. At this point, the savings account is no longer just a collection of numbers in an app. It represents options, freedom, and the ability to respond to life with confidence rather than fear. The difference is as much psychological as it is numerical. The individual moves from reacting to circumstances to proactively shaping them. Decisions are no longer driven by anxiety, but by strategic thinking about growth and opportunity. The fear that dominated prior financial behavior diminishes, replaced by a sense of control and empowerment. This control affects every aspect of life. Job decisions can be made with greater confidence. Investment choices become feasible, and personal risks can be taken with an understanding of the consequences rather than a paralyzing fear of loss. The individual begins to operate with a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity, recognizing that money is a tool that can generate more money when used wisely. The psychological shift also impacts daily behavior. Spending decisions are no longer constrained by panic over small fluctuations, but are made with evaluation of value and purpose. Money becomes an instrument to achieve goals rather than a source of constant worry. The ability to weather moderate emergencies without derailing financial stability allows the individual to maintain momentum, which reinforces positive behavior. The emotional security gained at this stage reduces stress and increases confidence, creating a feedback loop where control over finances leads to better decisions. Better decisions lead to increased savings, and increased savings reinforce a sense of financial competence. Beyond personal finance, the $10,000 milestone also represents a shift in identity. Before reaching this threshold, individuals see themselves as people who are trying to save money, struggling to make ends meet, and constantly vulnerable to unexpected events. After crossing the threshold, they see themselves as capable and competent with money. This identity shift is critical because it shapes long-term financial behavior. People who identify as competent savers are more likely to continue making disciplined choices, take calculated risks, and pursue opportunities that increase wealth. The first $10,000 is thus not just a numeric goal. It is the point where money ceases to control the individual and begins to work for them. It is a turning point that changes not only the account balance but also the person's self-perception, decision-making framework, and ability to create lasting financial security. Once this psychological barrier is crossed, saving becomes easier and more purposeful. Financial stress diminishes, and opportunities that were previously inaccessible become actionable. The individual is no longer trapped in the reactive cycle of scarcity, but steps into a proactive cycle of abundance, where money is used intentionally to expand freedom, create value, and secure long-term stability. This threshold, therefore, represents far more than a balance in a bank account. It represents a transformation in mindset, behavior, and identity that lays the foundation for sustainable financial growth and confidence for life. The concept of aggressive saving versus gradual saving is one of the most overlooked yet critical aspects of building financial momentum. Many people approach saving with the mindset of incrementalism, believing that small, consistent deposits over long periods of time will naturally lead to financial security. While this approach has a certain appeal in theory, in practice it often fails to produce meaningful psychological or financial results. Gradual saving leaves individuals trapped in what can be described as a vulnerable zone, where every minor emergency, unexpected expense, or disruption wipes out months of progress. Saving $50, $100, or even $200 a month is insufficient to create the kind of financial buffer that allows a person to feel safe or empowered. The results are slow, the progress imperceptible, and the mind begins to question the purpose of the effort. The frustration and discouragement associated with this slow accumulation frequently lead people to abandon their savings plans entirely, undermining both discipline and motivation. Aggressive saving, on the other hand, flips the script entirely. By prioritizing saving over immediate consumption, individuals treat saving as a non-negotiable commitment rather than an afterthought. The goal is to reach a meaningful threshold as quickly as possible, such as the $10,000 mark, which represents the point at which defensive financial behavior transitions into offensive wealth-building behavior. Aggressive saving requires restructuring daily life, temporarily sacrificing comfort, convenience, or luxury in order to accelerate the accumulation of capital. This might mean taking on additional work, cutting discretionary spending, or reorganizing priorities to ensure that savings come first. The result is that the individual reaches the psychological and financial tipping point much sooner, allowing them to experience the benefits of stability, control, and opportunity. The psychological impact of reaching this threshold cannot be overstated. Once $10,000 or more is saved, the mind interprets money differently. The fear, scarcity, and stress that dominated early-stage saving are replaced by confidence, clarity, and a sense of control. Spending decisions can be made strategically rather than defensively, and financial choices are evaluated based on value and opportunity instead of fear of loss. This shift dramatically changes behavior, creating a positive feedback loop. People who have crossed the threshold save more consistently, make smarter financial decisions, and approach investment opportunities with a sense of agency rather than trepidation. Aggressive saving accelerates the crossing of the vulnerable zone, reducing the risk that small setbacks will derail progress. It creates a sense of momentum that reinforces itself, making saving feel purposeful rather than punitive. The contrast between gradual saving and aggressive saving highlights a key psychological principle. The speed at which a goal is achieved influences motivation, self-perception, and the likelihood of maintaining positive habits. Slow accumulation keeps individuals in a state of perpetual struggle, whereas rapid accumulation produces tangible results that validate effort and encourage continued discipline. This principle applies not just to monetary outcomes, but to identity formation. People who save aggressively and reach meaningful financial milestones begin to see themselves as capable, competent, and in control of their financial lives. Their decisions reflect this identity, and they are far less likely to return to patterns of financial vulnerability. Ultimately, aggressive saving is less about income or ability and more about mindset, prioritization, and intensity. It transforms the act of saving from a slow, frustrating chore into a strategic process that builds both financial security and psychological resilience. The combination of rapid accumulation and the resulting identity shift lays the foundation for long-term wealth building. Strategic investment. and freedom from the cycle of scarcity that traps so many people in a perpetual state of financial defensiveness. This approach demonstrates that the manner in which savings are accumulated aggressively versus gradually is as important as the amount itself, defining not only financial outcomes but also long-term behaviors, confidence, and the capacity to leverage money effectively.